Okay, we're going to have a little run through an introduction to Adobe Premiere and also talk about how to get a basic edit going and also where to store things, where to put things on the systems that we've got here at Sussex. So when you first click on the icon, you'll end up with a screen that looks a little bit like this. If you want to load a previous project that you've been working on, it should come up in a list over here on the left. For today, we're going to set up a new project, so we'll click New Project. And then it asks you where you want to create the project. So what we're creating here is a project file, which basically contains all of the information about where your edits are and also points to where all your media is, but it doesn't actually contain the media itself. It's good working practice probably to keep all these files together. So you kind of need to understand where they're being stored or where you can store them so that you can do that. So if you're working from a removable drive, for example, it's a good idea probably to store all the files together on that drive. If you're working from the network drives, which is the sort of standard way to work within the department, then it should default to the correct places, but you need to check. So I'm going to browse to the right folder here. If you're working on a network machine, I'm working locally here at the minute, but if you're working on one of the machines in the Edit Labs, you'll have, under Devices up here, you'll have a drive that says Media for and then your username. And that's a good place to put your video project to start with. And you might also have a group folder up there if you're working in a group. So navigate to that place, and then you might want to set up a couple of different folders. So if you look at what I have here, I've created a folder called Premiere Projects, and within that I've got project files, which is what we're setting up at the minute, and then media, which is all of the video media. And I've copied all of my camera footage into that folder so that I can keep it all together and so that it's kind of organized within the system. So I'm going to I'm going to ask it to set up the project file within my project folder. I'm going to call it gliding example. And I've been working from discs, so we'll be importing the media from digitally. But if you're capturing from tape, you might want to set up this option here to HDV if you've been using HDV tape. You can check that the scratch discs and all the various different things are going to the same folder, but they should now that we've set it, they should all be going to the same folder that we've just set a minute ago. Okay, so we'll click OK. This brings us on to the next page, which is perhaps a little bewildering. This gives you all of the different file types and resolutions that you can have at the minute. And ideally, you need to set this up correctly at this stage, although there is a method for creating a new sequence later on based on the resolution of the clip. So you can drag a clip into a sequence and set it there. But if you know the resolution as you should from the camera that you've been working on, then you can set it here. So I've been using a D7000 and so it's digital SLR, it's 1080p, and that particular camera is 24 frames a second, so we need to select this option here. You may also, if you've been using Sony camera like a Z7 or an NX5, choose the AV-CHD option at the top here and choose one of the Sony formats. You can give your sequence a name. You can have as many sequences within a project as you like. Basically, that's like a timeline with an edit on it, and you can divide them up into lots of different sequences. So you could have an introduction sequence, you could have a montage sequence, and then you can compile them all together at the end into one large sequence. So that's sometimes useful for working on larger projects. For today, we'll just call this sequence 1. That's fine. And before we actually look at the space and start editing, there's one last quick check that we just need to do. If you're working from a network drive, this will probably be set up automatically. If you're working from a removable drive, it's worth checking. It's worth checking anyway, actually. So, and that's the place that the temporary files and cache files for the system are stored. So the problem, your edit will always work if these are in the wrong place, but sometimes you'll have to wait a long time for this cache and database to be rebuilt if it's stored it in the wrong place. So just go up to Premiere Pro and go to Preferences and go down to Media, and you'll see there that we have a couple of different places. Okay, so in this instance, this is set it to the default setting, which is an Adobe system drive, which is local to this computer. If you're using a network drive, it should say here the network drive, so it should say media 4 and then your username. If you're using a removable drive, you might have to set this to the removable drive, just so that it keeps it all in one place and doesn't have to rebuild it. If you store it on the local drive and then move to a different computer with your removable drive, it just has to rebuild that database because the database was stored on a different computer, and it just means that it's going to spend a lot of time indexing and conforming files down here, which slows down your workflow. So if you need to, just browse to the correct place. So in this case it might be, if I wanted to keep everything within the same folder, for example, just to kind of illustrate that idea, I would go to the Premiere Projects folder and I would maybe set up another folder here called Cache. In fact, actually, if you select Premiere Projects, just the root folder, it'll set that folder up automatically for you. Change both this location and this location for the media cache database. Once you set this one, it'll ask you if you want to move or delete the old cache, so I tend to just click on move for that. Okay, so that's worth checking, particularly if you're using a removable drive. Less important with the network drives. So this is the sort of main screen for Adobe CS6. It's slightly different from CS5 if you've been using that. They've just cleaned it up a little bit. Let's just quickly talk through what each of these sections are. So we have two screens at the top. We have a screen on the right, which is our output screen, and that will play back whatever's on the timeline, our kind of finished project. And on the left we'll have a source screen, which is for preparing the clips and kind of trimming them up and getting them correct before we put them onto the timeline. Below that we have the actual timeline here, which contains both video and audio tracks. On the right we have a levels meter, so that shows us our audio levels so that we can check that they're okay. We have a set of tools here, just in the middle, which we'll come back to probably in more detail on a later tutorial. And then we have a project window, which basically shows us all of the video clips that we've imported and any kind of extra clips like waves and graphics and things like that. If you're working over a couple of screens, if you've got the luxury of 2 or 3 screens, you can start to divide this screen up a bit. So we can change all of these panels around, we can grab them and make them smaller and larger and move them left and right. You can also detach the panels and move them somewhere else. So for example, one of the first things I would probably do if I had 2 screens was to grab the project panel here in the top left corner, near the little sort of hashed area, and then pull that out, and that will then detach that from there, and you could drag that across and put it on a second screen, so that you can spread that out and have a look in a little bit more detail at the files you've got. To put it back, you'll see there's a range of different types of ways of putting it back according to where the blue bar is. If I want to make it part of the tabs at the top here, then just select that area so that the tabs are all blue, and then we can that becomes one of the tabs again back at the top there. If you get in a bit of a muddle with your workspace, moving things around, you're not quite sure where things have gone or what you've done, it's quite possible that one of these windows will be closed, or you can reopen it by clicking on it. Also in Workspace here, there's a couple of default settings you can go to. Editing is the one which we've just been looking at, which is the kind of most common one, but you can change it around according to what you're doing. If you get a bit lost, you can reset current workspace, and that's quite a good one for just getting back to where you've started. If you prefer to work in a different way, you can also click New Workspace and then save that workspace, so that when you come back to working on your edit, you can use your custom workspace that you've created. Okay, so the first thing we need to do now then is to import some material. So we're going to go to File and we'll go to Import. And you can see where I had my Adobe Projects folder. I've got the media folder, which I mentioned before, and I've got my media for this particular film stored here. So I've got some MPEGs and I've got some waves, so that's video and audio files, although the video files do also have audio embedded within them. There's a small quirk with the D7000 material in that Adobe has a bit of a problem reading the MOV format which the D7000 produces, and so what I've actually had to do with these clips from the D7000 is rename them MPEG. So they would have been labelled .mov, click on them or right click on them, go to rename, and then just change that to MPG, and then it has no problem reading them. It's just a quirk of the system. If you need to do a batch of those, if there's a lot of them you need to do, then you can use Adobe Bridge, which should also be on the systems, to do a batch convert of those names. For the minute, we'll just select all of this media and click Import. So it's not actually moving the media or making any copies of it, it's just directing the software towards those files, which is why it's important to keep everything together. So in this instance, you would probably have those two folders on your media network drive, and you can access it all from there. You'll see now that it's conforming and indexing those files just down here on the right hand side, and we've now got access to these files in the list on the left here. You can view these things in a number of different ways, so let's just make this a little bit bigger so that we can see what's going on. So at the minute we've got a list of our media. You can choose an icon view down here at the bottom, so we're in list view at the minute. You can choose an icon view. That will give you pictures. Sometimes that's a little bit easier to work from. Obviously they're bigger, so you can see less on the screen. And the other thing you can do in list view is just change the size of the icons here, or that works in icon view as well, to make those bigger or smaller if you want to. Okay, so we've got our media sorted here. If I double click on any of those particular files, let's pick one that's quite nice, this one's pretty good, you'll see that brings it up into the source viewer. Now this has audio and video, like I said, included within it, so we'll just play this clip. Okay, so there's a nice roll there, sort of a focus shift down the wing towards the cockpit of the glider, and we just want to take that roll from the beginning of that to the end. I think there's a couple here. Okay, so maybe that second one's a little bit nicer. So what we're going to do is go back to the beginning of that shot, which is roughly there. Now we can do one of two things. We can either mark in or mark out using these little buttons here, either side here, or we can use I and O on the keyboard. So if I hit I on the keyboard, that will mark in, and then we can play through till we get to the point where we want to stop. Okay, and mark out. Okay, so we've now marked the points that we want, the area that we want to keep within this clip. Okay, and we can do one of two different things at this point. We can either click in the clip and drag it down onto the timeline. You'll see it comes down as two separate files. One is a video file and the other is the accompanying audio file. Okay, so that's one very quick and simple way of doing it. If you want to have more information on the audio file, you can just open up the audio channel here. And on the timeline we can also shrink and expand what's happening by clicking on the shrink and expand function just down at the bottom here. Okay, so we've got, if we now play this clip through, you'll see on the right hand screen at the top it plays from start to finish the clip that we just selected. Okay, and that's all we have on our timeline at the minute. So the next clip, we just repeat that process. We can double click on the clip down here on the left and just have a quick look through this clip, which is much the same. Okay, so we might just want to take a small section of that clip, so I can mark in with the button here, play it until I want it to stop, mark out. Okay. Now, what I've actually done this time is, what I did the last time was I brought the whole clip down, including the audio, but actually there's just a lot of wind on that microphone, and it may be that I don't want to use that audio, or I'm going to replace it with music or interview or something like that. So if we don't want to bring the audio down, there's a couple of different options we can do here. You can either drag video only, or if you want to do it the other way around, you can drag audio only. So in this instance, rather than taking the audio down, we'll drag just the video only. So I'm going to click here and bring it down, and you'll see that it just comes down as a video file with no accompanying audio file. Okay, so but now we've got a little bit of an inconsistency because we've got a video file with no audio, and we've got a video file with audio here. So This is maybe getting in the way a little bit. But if I select it, you'll see that these two items are connected, so that if I were to delete it by hitting the delete key, for example, it takes both of them away. Let's just do Command Z for undo. It's very useful. So undo just brings us back to where we were. If you forget that shortcut, Command Z, you can go up to the Edit menu, and then undo is just at the top there. So in this instance, we want to take away the audio file and leave the video file behind. So let's just right-click on this clip and see what our options are. Okay, and if you look at the top here, you'll see there's an option called Unlink. And if I unlink that, that basically detaches the audio from the video. It makes them two separate files, which now means that if I select the audio file and hit delete, I can get rid of that separately. A couple of other, well, one or two other useful functions in that menu. Enable basically just kind of enables or disables that clip. So if we want to remove something temporarily, but we don't want to have to take it out of the edit and we don't want to have to remove it completely, you can just unenable that track, or that clip rather, and that'll just get rid of that clip temporarily. It just grays it out. And then our second clip is there. Okay, so let's just re-enable that. And there's a couple of other things that we'll look at here at a later date. Obviously, you can rename clips. There's an option to send it to After Effects, and also if it's an audio clip, you can send it to Audition to work on it separately, but we'll look at those at a later point. So we've got our clips in our timeline. We can shrink and expand here, like we mentioned before. I can make adjustments once we're on the timeline as well, and these tools do a range of different things. Probably the one you'll use most is the tool which it starts off with, which is the default tool, which will allow you to move it left or right if you click in the center of that clip. If you click at the edge, it will allow you to trim either side of the clip. Okay, so you can make it a little bit shorter if you decide it's too long, or if on this side we could move it there and then drag it back a bit. There's a razor tool which allows you to just cut. Okay, so we can just cut at any point on the clip, so we could trim the end off a clip if you wanted to, or you could take the middle section out of a clip. So that's now two separate clips. And all of these tools have different keyboard shortcuts which you'll get used to. If you can get used to using the shortcuts, it will make things much quicker as you start to edit properly. So for example, this tool is V and the razor tool is C. So if I'm down here and I'm just working away and I want to cut, I can hit C, cut, and then I can hit V and go back, and that's really quick. That's a quick way of working without having to constantly go over to this tool panel here. Okay, so let's just undo a couple of stages back to where we were. Okay, so we've got our a couple of video tracks now, and we may want to introduce a bit of interview, for example. So I can scroll down here. I've got a few tracks which look slightly different from our video tracks because they don't have any video to them. So these are just audio tracks. Okay, so you see the audio waveform here. So this was recorded on a Marantz. I can click on that and I can play through our audio file. Okay, there's a bit of audio scrubbing there, so you can hear kind of what's going on.
I think with other types of flying, particularly power flying, it's a little bit like driving a car.
Okay, so we might want to take this little section here, so we'll just mark in.
I think with other types of flying, particularly power flying, it's a little bit like driving a car. You don't have to stick to the road, but you set a course, you steer a course, you're going somewhere. With gliding, in order to get to that turn point, destination, then you're totally reliant on the elements, so you're following the energy.
Okay, so we've got something that's kind of roughly right there. We can click at the top of this section. It's a little bit different. You don't click in the middle of this window for audio. Just click at the top and we can drag it down onto our audio channel. And then we've got our audio file there. So
I think with other types of flying...
okay, so we need a little bit of a trim at the front here, so we can grab at the front and drag that in and then move it back. If you want to make this file a little bit bigger, easier to see, you can drag that up, and remember that's a vertical zoom, and also we've got a horizontal zoom as well. So use those tools to kind of get things accurate, otherwise you're going to land up with little bits left on your timeline that kind of interrupt the flow of your film.
I think with other types of flying, particularly power flying, it's a little bit like driving a car. You don't have to stick to the road, but you set a course, you stick.
Okay. Okay, so we'll leave that that particular tutorial there. So that's the basic clips for the basic procedures for setting up a project, importing your media, and getting a couple of clips onto the timeline.